Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews. Once again, temporary name. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Dispatches from Elsewhere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, the focus of this episode is Janice. You know, Octavio's kind of giving us that opening, and he's like, "Oh, it's in the form of a cartoon. You like cartoons, right? Everyone likes cartoons," and kind of gives us a little concise understanding of who Janice is. That she found someone that was perfect, but not like perfectly perfect. There, wasn't 100% a perfect fit, but it was lovely enough. And yes, they had their ups and downs, because we never actually got to find out but what went down between Janice and Lev, where it's like, because Janice brings it up later on, like he broke her heart, and we see her kind of slapping him in an animated synopsis at the beginning, but I'm thinking like maybe he cheated on her or something. But the fact of the matter is, despite their ups and downs, they had such a great life. But then we find out something happened. At first you're kind of worried like maybe he died or something, or at the very least we know that he ended up in a hospital. So I wasn't really 100% sure like what the whole situation was, but kind of finding her present day. And obviously she's so frantic about like, oh, gotta find Fredwin, like, oh, Fredwin, he might be dead and stuff like that. Luckily they were able to, make their way inside, trying to head to, trying to get to Fredwin. But I love the whole situation of like, oh, like Simone sees a dude and it's like, oh, he looks horny and gullible. And Peter's like, is it really that easy? And she's like, you have no idea. And so there's a situation, because like initially, like, it seemed like she was kind of taking charge, but then the moment it kind of started getting to that stuff, she was like, no, you guys go ahead. You guys are probably handle this way better than me. So it's a thing of like, I think Janice is kind of afraid to kind of take charge. She's kind of like, I'm kind of like, it's like, because the whole thing that he brought up at the beginning, Octavio, was, where do you go from here? Like, what happens now? Like, when you spend so much of your life as a partner, like you being a duo with someone, always having someone by your side, the rhythm's just not the same when you're kind of having to go off, live your life kind of on your own. So for her, it's just like, unless it's someone by her side, she's not really willing to take those steps forward. Because I think it's like Peter and Simone are there, but I think for her, it's obviously not quite the same. And so it's just like interesting, like the lady is like, oh, you're here for the Jejune Institute, what was it, shareholders meeting and stuff like that. And she's like, yeah, no, actually, no. I guess it just shows you how very honest Janice can be, the fact that she was honest about that. But then it's like, oh no, we're trying to get to, the car, and it's like, oh, it's a catch-22, and I love the woman being like, I don't get what that is. And it's like, right. She's like, it means a thing that can't happen without the other thing, which kind of puts it in a cycle of like, whatever the case, her trying to explain the old catch-22 thing, I thought was kind of interesting. But I guess that was just kind of another element to show like, oh yeah, Janice is a little older, a little wiser, a little more experienced, so she knows about that. But I was able to kind of get them into the garage, and I love it's like, Peter's like, hey, leave it to me, ladies, and he tries to lift up the trunk. It's like, eh. And Simone's like, really? Just pop the trunk. It's like, right. Pop the trunk. It's like, oh, Fredwin. Oh, he's not dead. Good. It's like, well, and I love Peter being like, and the dry delivery of it too. Well, I mean, he might not be dead. Well, he's not dead in the trunk, but it doesn't mean he's not dead somewhere else. And someone's almost just like, why are you doing it? It's like, well, it's like, I mean, he's probably not dead, but he could be dead. But Fredwin calls Janice, is like he wants her to get some envelope off of some letter or something off of Octavio, who, obviously, and it's so interesting too, the fact is that he does kind of know everybody by name. He immediately is like, oh, Peter, Simone, Janice, and it's just like, I think that kind of speaks volumes of like, it seems like he kind of at least has, a familiar enough face of everyone, because you'd assume everyone's kind of been through that. And even they kind of even show that basically the means of getting to the Jejune Institute was different for different people, because I forgot what it was that Janice, it was like something like anti-gravity, something that Janice talked about, like the fact is that's what kind of got her to this, but obviously that's not the same thing that got Peter there, like, so it was a different, I guess the whole, well, because I forgot, because each time Peter kept coming across a different one, but he wouldn't take it until he got to the one of like, have you seen this guy? And he saw the guy was putting up the poster of like, oh, have you seen me? So it's that whole situation. So I don't know if we ever found out what got I don't know, I don't remember if they brought that up last episode, what got Simone, like what flyer in particular did she pull something from to kind of get started. Maybe they did and I'm just not remembering. Regardless, but it was really interesting, the whole like, I love that Janice, had an attempt of like, oh, I'm so freezing, I'm so cold. Oh, I'm so cold, Octavio. And Peter's like, I'll give you my jacket. It's like, no. If you do that, you'll be cold, Peter. And trying to get Octavio's jacket. But he's like, oh, the fact of the matter is, I keep it like a crisp 64 back here, so you can go sit down. And Janice was like, no, I don't want to. And Peter's like, fine, we'll go with you. But I love Simone being like, no, I'm fine kind of staying back here. But the thing is that Peter wanted to be the one. I think it's kind of interesting, like in the grand scheme of things, that Peter is the one that kind of wanted to look after, like, Janice, make sure she was okay, where Simone's just kind of like, no, she's got this in many different regards. But I don't know, there is this almost like adorableness to Janice, like, that she's kind of on this kind of misadventure and all that. But for her, it's a thing of like, because Octavio kind of explains, like, explaining what the whole Jejune Institute's kind of all about, and it's furthering what the human mind and human body is capable of. And he brought up this whole interesting thing about, like, the fact is that he brought up this thing about, like, oh, people only remember, you only remember things one time. Subsequent times, every time you remember something, you're actually remembering the memory of that thing. And then you start remembering the memory of, remembering that memory. So everything becomes a memory of a memory of a memory, so on and so forth. And I think that's so interesting because he even uses it as an example of, like, it becomes a game of telephone. Because that's always the thing, like, time is always the enemy. Because given enough time, you always remember things a little bit differently. Like, oh, like, you can never trust that your memory is 100% intact because you're remembering something. But and I've done that multiple times, or like I will remember something years later that I haven't thought about, but is it 100% the way it actually went down, or is it just 100% the way I remember it? But every time you remember that memory, it ends up becomes remembering a memory of a memory of a memory, like I was saying earlier. So that whole breakdown of it was so interesting. I was like, oh, I can kind of get behind something like that, the thought process behind it. So there's like a VR set. They end up bringing like Janice on stage, and the whole point was to basically, like, put you in a position where it's like, because the whole conversation was about like remembering who you are, and it's like that's kind of like the number one, like, human question, like, they want to answer, because it's like, when you can't really remember anything, when you're remembering the memory of a memory, so on and so forth, it's like, the possibility of forgetting who you are, losing yourself in that, you want to hold on to that identity, because, looking in the mirror one day and realizing, like, oh, who am I? Which obviously that's something we could see from Peter's story. We can see there's an element of that with Simone's story. We can see an element of that, and even with Janice's story, because for her, it's like, now that Lev isn't on these adventures with her, she's kind of having to do this on her own. It's like, who am I without him? And it's such an interesting thing. Like, the VR gets put on, and obviously it's like, it's very like surreal and stuff like that. It's actually kind of sad because, like, Simone was like, yeah, like, she'd rather not go down that road because, like, the past isn't something she's really all that interested in retreading. But then she was like asking Peter, like, well, what memory would you want to go back to? And he was like, well, I think they need photos for it, and I don't have any. And I was like, oh, well, that was a little heartbreaking. Both, once again, things I can kind of understand because, like Peter, I don't have many memories of the past. Like, there are very, like, even using me as a kid, for example, there are very few photos because I never, even during school, I'm not big on taking pictures of myself. So, I mean, I know that's kind of a whole other thing, but in pictures in general, I'm not that big. Like, I wish I was a little more sentimental about it just to be able to cherish those memories and stuff like that. But obviously, it's like, oh, you don't have to worry about the DVD of, like, your son making a DVD of their wedding so that you could always have that memory. Like, it always being a concrete, making it be intact. But it's like with the VR set, you can actually be there, you can feel it, and it's like made it private. They made it, he made it private so that only, Janice could see, and has her take a step back and look to the side. And it's like she looks into the mirror and sees her younger self, and she's actually having a conversation with herself about, like, her life and everything. It starts off nice and friendly, but then it gets complicated because it turns into a thing of, like, oh yeah, like, did we do all the things we wanted to do, become like a teacher and stuff like that? And it's a situation where it seems like Janice had so many, like, when she was younger, she had all these goals of, like, oh, I want to do this, and this, I want this to happen, I want this to continue. But it seems like after a while, all that vanished because it's a thing of, like, she kind of almost lost her identity in her marriage, which is a whole thing. Once again, it's a conversation I've had before, when you kind of lose yourself in your partner, which once again, kind of making someone your everything. So, like, everything in your life kind of revolves around them. That kind of happened to Janice, and obviously her younger self kind of resents her because it's like, you made a promise that we were going to be like this. But she was like, oh yeah, I did do that stuff for a while, but then eventually I started including my husband in it. And so it's kind of like a thing of like who she was before versus who she is now, because it's like, oh, you've lost your identity. Like we held on, like, because it's like, you know, for Janice, she forgot so much because like she was like promise. She makes it seem like, oh, I remember everything, but it's like initially she forgot what promise it was that she had made to herself, because it was kind of like, because she even talked about it before, where it's like she kind of forgot much about her life before she got married, because it's like, you know, you kind of forget who you were before then, because like, oh, because she spent so much of her life by her, you know, with, you know, her and her husband side by side, that outside, you know, the life that they lived was beautiful. They had their ups, they had their downs. She's like, he broke my heart once, but the fact is he helped fix it back. But, you know, I was always able to kind of lord that over him. So, you know, that's always kind of nice to have that in the back pocket. But the fact of the matter is, it's like her younger self, which has kind of almost resented her for being like in this position of, you know, you've lost your own identity and stuff like that. But for Janice, it's like, no, I grew up and I lived this happy life. It's kind of like you're young. It's almost kind of, it's the thing of like, it's almost that complicated thing of like, who's right in this situation? Is young Janice right, or is older Janice? Like, you can understand where older Janice is coming from, but at the same time, you understand where younger Janice is coming from with that whole situation. What the thing is, I think the point is there to be a perfect balance of the two, of kind of having your own freedom, your own identity, kind of enjoying being by yourself, but at the same time, being alone isn't always the happiest thing either. Like, you know, you're independent. It's like, you know, because younger Janice was kind of saying like, yeah, it's fine and dandy to share stuff with someone, like with your husband and everything, but there to be certain things you keep to yourself. But older Janice never kept anything to herself. It's like I always, you know, share them with my husband and everything. So it's that interesting thing of like, you know, Janice, once again, it's like the downside is because of everything, like her life is so invested with her husband that they're so intertwined. She let go of so many things she wanted from her life, just because, you know, it's just because it was no longer about her. It was no longer just her. It was them. So it's kind of a thing of like I said, losing your identity. And like in a relationship, I can understand that. So it's just kind of a give and take. Like I said, it's hard to say whether like there's anyone really wrong or right. You know, it's a complicated shade of gray with that whole situation. It's not just so clear cut, black and white with the whole situation. And Jen is having to kind of confront that. She was kind of like, no. Peter was like, oh, should we? You know, I don't like this. But someone's like, oh, she'll be okay. But Peter actually comes over to her because he's actually worried about her. Janice kind of hugs Octavio. She's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you. In that moment, you're like, you're stealing it from him, aren't you? And so they end up leaving because Janice wants, some fresh air. But sadly, they end up getting locked out. But Fredwin was what they were kind of there for. And it's like, oh, so what do we do? Fredwin shows up and he brings up a very interesting discovery that basically the Jejune Institute and the Elsewhere Society, because at first there was that little thing. Part of me was wondering what that was about, because obviously I love that thing of like, oh yeah, Commander 14 makes you wonder what happened to 13. And someone was like, and she looks and neither Peter or Janice laugh, and she's like, sorry, that was just clever. But the fact of the matter is, it's a situation of all the commander and other people from the Elsewhere Society showed up. And part of me was thinking like, oh, I thought it was like Jejune Institute propaganda. That's what I thought it was, of like, oh yeah, here's your weapons and everything. And here's the Elsewhere Society you have to fight and stuff. Like, I thought that's what it was, almost like getting fake people to show up. Like, I didn't think that was really, but it kind of sounded like the commander, but it still could have been. It's hard to say. Because there was even a point that Peter was making of like, though, what the big question is this real? And Octavio was like, in this moment, this is the most real things this is the most real thing that it's ever, happened, so it's like, things are at its most real right now, essentially, is what Octavio was kind of saying. But Fredwin shows up and says, like, basically, the Jejune Society and the Elsewhere Institute are literally the same thing. It's like, yes, it seems like almost like there's a game of choice, but at the end of the day, everything is always going to end up at one point. How you get there, sure, it could be a little different, but basically saying there is no choice in this. That there isn't just some game. There's a deeper thing to this. It is a game, but there's a using Westworld for example, there's a center that is maze to a certain extent. So the fact of the matter is, Fredwin found the script So it's kind of like he knows exactly what was going to go down in exactly one moment. So it's like, for him, it's like, we need to kind of jump on this immediately. But Simone and Peter want to just take things slow because, you know, Janice is going through a lot, which obviously Janice takes offense to, because it's like, oh yeah, the old lady, yeah, she needs to take a break, right? And ends up heading Fredwin, because Fredwin was like, all right, fine. You know, it's like, do you know what I went through to get all this information, which Peter was kind of, and someone were kind of looking like, yeah, but you weren't the only one through it and stuff. He's like, fine. Since Janice needs to take a break, and she's like, oh yeah, the old lady was like, well, here, Fredwin, I got what you needed. And she's like, since I'm the old lady, I'm gonna go take a break, and I'll see you guys later. Which Fredwin, you know, we can see that he's kind of a very, like, I don't think he recognized the social cues to a certain extent, because he didn't recognize, you know, he was very insensitive. He's so caught up in his need to discover the truth that he wasn't too caught up in what Janice was going through. But obviously, Simone and Peter were looking after, you know, looking out for Janice's best interest, but for her, it just feels a little like you're coddling me like I'm old and I can't do anything, and that you have to kind of slow down for me. Because at first it was a thing of like she kind of felt like they were friends, but now it just seems like, oh, they just kind of pity her. Like that's kind of what her younger self kind of made her kind of feel like, and I think she kind of felt it in that moment. But when she does go back home, she's, you know, talking to her husband. You know, her caretaker was named Margaret, ended up leaving, and so it's a thing of like, I'm glad that you're having fun. You need to get out. It's a good thing for you to get out of the house every once in a while. And so she kind of, you know, is regaling her husband about, like, you know, the misadventure she was on. And just like, the fact of the matter is, just like, I wish you were there with me. Well, truth be told, is you would have hated every moment of it, you know? So, like I said, it's just a whole complicated thing of like, you know, is it bad that she lost herself in her marriage because to be able to build what she built with her husband, you know, wasn't all bad. I mean, it was more good than bad, you know, but it's like at the same time, losing yourself in all of that, you know, like I said, it's like almost this balancing act. But at the end, there's also that kid outside the window, the makeup on and a frowning face, and I'm like, what is that about? So, just an interesting development. You know, I'm really curious to kind of see, you know, where all this takes us going forward into the next episode when they do meet up, because they're going to meet up like the next night to kind of debate, you know, strategy, because for everyone needs time to really contemplate what he's going to do next. So I'm really curious to see where all this takes us going forward. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.